evening. How's everyone doing tonight? Good evening. Good. So my name is Michelle, and I'm the founder of Bryce's Journey. It's a nonprofit organization that my mission is to provide advocacy, support, and social skills groups to high-functioning children with autism spectrum disorder. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story. I have a son. His name is Bryce. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 3. When my son was diagnosed with autism, my mom had just passed away from cancer. So I really didn't know where to turn, or I didn't know what autism was. I really didn't have any support. So on my journey with my son, he started therapy with clinicians, but it was like adult to child. And he did a lot of therapy, and then he was nonverbal, but then he spoke again. So by the time that my child became school aged, he needed a social skills group to attend. And so when I looked for one in Dorchester, Hyde Park, Mattapan, Rosendale, I could not find one. And when I could find one, it was really, really expensive. So when I thought about my son and not being able to receive a social skills group, I thought about other children that live in our communities that can't get a social skills group. So that inspired me to start Bryce's Journey. We're 501c3 exempt. I have board members. I have a licensed clinician. Right now we give services out of Cotton Square Health Center. So while the clinician is in with the children, and I make sure that they're structured, I take topics that I deal with on a daily basis with my son, things that he's going through, that other children with autism and ADHD, they're going through the same things. While the kids are with the clinician, I give parent support groups because, like myself, when my son got diagnosed, I didn't have any support. So I think it's very important to support the parents and let them know that I am here, and I do give parent support groups at Common Square on Tuesdays from 5:30 to 6:30. One week we give the support group, the next week I like to give educational workshops. As well as being an advocate, I'm also a paralegal, so I like to just educate parents on IEPs and things that could help them not be so frustrated sometimes when they're leaving an IEP meeting. I do like to say that just in my journey, I find that it is good that Bryce gets services in school, but the key core for him is out of school. So when the kids are in school all day, after that he goes to the social skills group. It's really important to put services outside of school into your child's routine. So you can have the school services, but if you can get ABA, they come right to your home. If you can get a social skills group, it just keeps it keeps your child just not to regress. And so with that being said, if anyone has any questions, I will answer them. Yes.
Do you know anything about, like, my oldest is autistic, but she's very high functioning. She speaks 14 languages in French, or 4. But my big thing is she's going into high school, and I'm petrified. And the school didn't help picking out the schools, so we pretty much, me and my friend Michelle, her daughter's going to high school too, we pretty much did it ourselves. And I put the 3 on the list, and I found out today she's going to Kennedy, not the Kennedy, Fenway, and I know nothing about it, it wasn't on the list,
So I would suggest, like me personally, my son goes to a charter school, but I like to shadow. So if you could always call
I
and say, can I
have
shadow?
called, and I'm going to see if I can go in next week with my daughter and my husband to go in and look at the school to make sure that's
The
what I want and I'm
appropriate-
comfortable, because I'm very I have 4 kids. I'm extremely overprotective, and I refuse to send my child to school. As long as she's safe.
So I strongly suggest that you make an appointment and just shadow that school.
Yes.
And if that school is not a good fit, to always shadow. I'm like a real good, I shadow a lot, just to let yourself into the school.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I'm a great-grandmother of a 9-year-old that I care for. She has ADHD, but I'm seeing some signs of autism. She has an IEP, and she's reading at a grade 1 level. She's in the 3rd grade, heading to the 4th grade.
Okay.
When she get her reports from the school, they tell me how great she's doing. But then when I get the report cards are saying something different. She has the IEP. The services that she has in place, I seem to think they may be helping her somewhat, but I'm not really sure, and we're about to have another meeting, but I think there are some changes that need to be made.
So I suggest that I'll give you my card, and I will personally sit down with you, and I can go over the IEP with you.
Oh, thank you.
And so we can go over the IEP together, and we'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes.
What ages do you have at your groups?
So right now, we're doing 4th and 5th grades, but, so the children can sign up, and then when a slot becomes available, the child will come in. I have an assessment form. I believe that you can always you can email me if you're interested, and I will send an assessment form for you to fill out, so I can understand what would you like for your child to gain from the group, and then we work from there. So I like to group them all together. I don't like, so it'll mess it up if one is behind and one is like this. I like to group them all, together. So,
I'm sorry. Do you need an autism diagnosis?
So yes, so we give groups to children with autism and ADHD, and if you do not have a medical diagnosis, I know how to help you to get one.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Hi.
I just was hoping to get a card from you later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
What school does it?
So right now, my nonprofit is very new. I'm working on building it, and once I build it, I plan on doing every grade. So what I will do is, I'm sorry, what grade is your child in? He's 3. He's 3. So Bryce, so can I just suggest something to you? So when my son was 3, I put him into the Home for Little Wanderers, and they have something that's called play therapy. It sounds like weird, because I thought it was, but it's really not weird. So they do play, but they incorporate stuff in, and when Bryce went, he was nonverbal. But after like a year, you don't understand, the first word he said was, "I want milk." And I was like, "Oh, you want what?" He's like, "Milk!" So, and I was like crying. I was like, "Oh my God, this was when I came the whole gallon, here you go." But after that, after Bryce did the Home for Little Wanderers, that's when he needed a social skills group, after he mastered that. So I would say, if you could reach out to them, and then after that's mastered, then your child will be ready to come to my social skills group. Okay? All right. Is there anything? Yes.
I have an 8-year-old, 2nd grade. He is ADHD. He is on an IEP at the London school, and
What class?
2nd grade.
Oh, second, I have 2 kids with ADHD that are at the London.
Really?
Is it 4 and 7? And they both have IEPs.
Okay, yeah. I guess my question, I haven't really been happy with the services. So I don't know how to move, or how to find out which schools are more specialized maybe for ADHD,
Right.
and how do you move within the system in the Boston Public Schools as well?
So I would suggest again, picking out some schools to shadow them, and if you're not happy with your IEP, I can go over it with you.
Yeah.
To make better, choices and see what options that you have.
Okay.
Also, Lisa Connors works for families at Boston Public Schools, and she could also help you navigate that
Okay.
as well.
Great. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I have my card here, so I'm,
That they,
I'm
my
Sped.
7-year-old kids in.
So I'm Lisa Connor. Everybody, nice to meet everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We have a great crowd. And so I am the district special education parent support coordinator. I'm also a parent of a child with special needs. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll leave my card out in case you have questions. The best way to get me is by email. Okay?
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Roxy. I'm one of the SpedPAC members here too. And I want to introduce Cornelia, Elwood, and Laura Perez from AANE on the Asperger Autism Network. They are going to be talking to us about different things, but also about parent coaching. I personally utilized them last year with the IEP review, because my 9-year-old has autism, ADHD, and some other difficulties. So, and I found it to be a very helpful experience with them reviewing the IEP, because there was a lot of problems with my IEP at the time. My child does attend this school here at the Murphy, but so they will talk to you about the different resources they have that they can help you utilize. So, please, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. So excited to be here. Autism is sort of our passion, and so my name is Cornelia, this is Laura. We both have children on the spectrum, and we got really interested in this topic because, at least I can speak for myself, I got really interested in this topic because I was sort of brought to my knees by parenting a child on the spectrum and all the injustices that entail. And my child was getting kicked out of groups. He was having huge problems in school. Sort of, our home was completely chaotic, and I was so confused by the whole process that I ultimately ended up going back to school for autism spectrum disorders, and because I just could not figure it out on my own. So my passion is this, and I know Laura's is too, and she will talk a little bit about herself too, I'm sure. And I just wanted to say thank you for having us. We're going to go through what autism is. Well, I'll show you exactly what we're going to, there we go. We're going to talk about ASD. So when I say ASD, I'm talking about autism spectrum disorders, Asperger syndrome. We might also say within this talk, and autism. We're talking about sort of the whole thing, just so you know. We're going to talk about practical strategies to help your child, like parenting strategies, and then we'll talk about how AA can help you. So first of all, I wanted to let you know that we're going to talk about autism first, and that autism is known as a spectrum disorder because there's a whole variety of different features and associated features of autism that I'm going to talk about. And within each of those, there's a whole variety of degree of severity. So I'm going to talk about that within the next slide. The other thing is that it occurs across all socioeconomic, racial, ethnic. It has no boundaries, no borders. It can be a lifelong diagnosis, but the thing is that there is treatment that helps. And that's one of the reasons that we're here to talk to you today about treatment and we can help with. So starting off, just a very broad overview, and Laura is going to sort of break it down into the details for us, but with autism spectrum disorders, the social differences, communication differences, and restricted patterns of behavior, activities, and interests all must be in place to get a diagnosis. These are associated features. So there's sensory differences, motor differences, cognitive differences, and emotional vulnerability. These can be in place as well. So for instance, my son is impacted in all 7 categories, but some people just have what they have to have just to get the diagnosis. Some people have this plus sensory. The different, for instance, sensory can be very extreme or less extreme. And so that's sort of what I'm talking about in terms of the spectrum. Does that make sense? Yeah. One thing that's really important to know is that ASD is a neurological disorder. It is not a mental illness. It's not a behavioral disorder. It's not an emotional disorder. It's a difference in the way that the brain is wired.
Can I mention something I've heard a study some time, this is what I heard, is that these babies, when they're being born, can be mishandled somewhat. And it's, the brain needs to be protected. And I was told that there's some studies showing that if a baby's mishandled, their brain and all that, it could cause them to have this disorder.
That's so interesting.
That's why
I didn't learn that in school, but I'd be really interested in
yeah, I
seeing
would
that.
like to
Yeah, that's
find out if
interesting.
that's happening.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that too. So basically, the key is if we can think about this through sort of the brain lens and the difference in the brain as opposed to a lot of times I think that people found my son disrespectful, rude, sort of this negative light. But when we think about all of those features that happen before the day begins, based on all of the features and associated features, we can think of what these children are dealing with and look at it through that neurological sort of brain lens. I think we can have great compassion and empathy for ourselves and for our children. And that's sort of the focus that we at AAE have. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura. She's going to go in deeper and I'll talk with you at the end.
Thank you, it's great to be here. As Cornelia said, I'm also the mom of it's not a child anymore, it's a young adult in the spectrum. He's now 19, but growing up, I've been through hundreds and hundreds of IEP meetings. I've been through suspensions for behavioral issues that were not behavioral issues, but symptoms of the autism. And so everyone who works at A&E, everyone in there is being affected by autism one way or another. It's a child or a sister or a brother. We even have staff members that are on the spectrum working in our organization. So every time that you call A&E, whoever answers the phone knows exactly what you're feeling, how overwhelmed you can feel, and what you're going through. So we only have like 15 minutes to talk about this, so it's just gonna be really fast. If you have any questions, you can talk to me afterwards, or you can always call us or email us. So the first thing I wanted to do was link with what you were saying, that many times schools, the community see our kids or can see our kids as defiant, as disrespectful, but in reality, these are kids who are overwhelmed, who are anxious, who are confused. I'm just gonna do something, I know we don't have much time, but I wanna do something quick. Just to show you, give you an idea of what our kids are going through in their day-to-day life. I want you to go to your table and talk to the people that are in your table and talk about today's weather, but you're not allowed to use the letter A. So just have a conversation, but the words that you're using, any word that has the letter A in it, you cannot use it. So try to have a conversation like that. I'm going to do it for just 30 seconds. Okay, go ahead.
It is cold.
That's it. We didn't use any A's.
Okay, so what do you think? Was it easy? Was it okay? Was it, how do you feel? Very challenging. Challenging, what else?
Frustrating.
Frustrating, what else?
Slow.
Slow?
Yeah, you have to think before you speak.
You have to think before you speak? Overwhelming? Can you imagine spending the whole day having to speak like that for 6 hours in school? Exhausting. You just go home and say, I don't want to do homework, I don't want to do anything, I'm done. This is how our kids spend their lives. It's a world that is not a foreign world, it's not another country, no, they're here. They know what's going on, but sometimes it's hard to understand. It takes their whole focus, everything, 5 senses, just streaming into what they are saying and how they're communicating and how they're censoring the world around them. It is overwhelming, it is confusing, it is exhausting. So just think about that when your kid has a meltdown, when your kid gets home and doesn't want to do homework, when you have a kid in high school who didn't do the project or didn't turn on the homework and you know they're capable of doing it. Just think about this exercise today and it will give you a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. So we always at A&E, like Cornelia mentioned before, we like to talk about strengths first and foremost, because our kids are very capable of achieving their goals, and when we're working with them, it's good also always to bring forward their strengths and work on that so we can help them develop skills. So what are the strengths that come linked with autism? Good memory. Many kids have very good memory. They have a creative talent. They actually see the world in a completely different way out of the box, and now we know how more and more companies are looking for that out of the box thinking that only people with this kind of brain working can bring to a company, a different perspective. Just gonna go really fast. They're persistent. If it's something they're interested on, they're gonna go and go and go until they get it. They're fair. They're just. They're honest. They have that desire to connect. They're logical, and they have intense focus. So these are all these strengths that we can use to build that child and make him successful. So in terms of what might be the challenges that they have, number one is the social differences. And here I wanted to point out that it is important to understand our own kids' profile. Every single child on the spectrum is absolutely and completely different. Like you were saying, some have some sensory issues, some have some social issues more than the sensory part. My kid or my son, especially his anxiety. For him, it's anxiety what really gets to him. And so when we're advocating for our kids, it is important to have that map of who is my kid, what are his strengths, what are his or her challenges, and based on that, then create a support, a team, an IEP, and all the services that they need. So it is important to know strengths, and now when we're talking about the challenges and the differences, and then to think is that for my child it is not, that's a big part of his life, it is not, it's a, so and so, but it's important to understand the map for our own child that is different for every single child, and then that is critical for when we're doing our child's IEP, that we understand exactly what he needs. Not because he has autism, he needs to have speech and language and OT and the psychologist, and all the kids are different and they're going to need different things. So number one with the social differences, well, they might have challenges taking perspective. Like, for instance, he writes beautifully and he has great ideas, but don't ask him to put those ideas on paper. Why? Because he doesn't know how, or he didn't know how to organize those ideas. All those beautiful ideas that he had executive, or he has executive functioning challenges, so it was hard for him to get organized in his brain and put it into paper. And then nonverbal communication, like if I'm here talking to you and I'm like this, it's different than if I'm like this, right? The way I present myself is different. Oops. Okay, there it goes. Well, we can. I don't know which one was the. No, we can continue with that. Well, many of our kids have a special interest or a special talent. Some kids are into trains and they know everything about. Oh, okay. Just gonna skip this one. So that can be a strength. That can also be a challenge. Because if you have a kid who's obsessed with computers, well, that child can one day be working and, developing a software, who knows what. My son was always obsessed with history and movies, watching movies all the time, but all movies from the 1950s, and he knew all about the camera tricks and everything. Well, he's now starting to be a documentary filmmaker because that's his obsession. don't ask him to do a math problem because he doesn't know.
My daughter wants to be a translator for the military, but my big issue is you have to have, a lot of people that don't know this, I didn't know until when I was applying for high school. Your kids are gonna be going to school, so they're at least, well, not everyone, but if they can pass the MCAS, they go, if not, your kids are gonna be going to school till they're 22 years old. And they won't get a diploma, they will get a certificate of a complete, and we are actually not happy about that, because what she wants to do, like, my husband was military, so she wants to be able to join, but you need a diploma. So we're working towards trying to get her to do MCAS.
Yeah.
Like, she's going into high school, and she doesn't need the IEP, and, like, she has the IEP, and she's in the autism program, but she doesn't need, like, she's not getting the service because she doesn't need it anymore. So my big thing is, like, that's one thing I was, like, very upset about, and I didn't know about the whole going to school till they're 22 years old, and just getting a piece of paper saying they complete it, not, they don't get a diploma.
Well, again, it's different for every child.
Yeah,
Some kids.
but I was like, seriously, like, that's not fair to our child, like, they should get a diploma. They work their butts off, go to school till they're 22.
Yeah.
They get a piece of paper.
Yeah, not every child, but yeah.
Yeah,
Some
but I
kids
mean, they have
cannot
to pass the
MCAS.
MCAS
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah.
So we're
But,
working towards the MCAS anyway. I was upset about that.
So anyways, like your daughter, she's into languages, that's the perfect path, she's going to be a translator, perfect. But at the same time, they're so hyper-focused on one thing that if you ask them to do something different, then it's challenging. And in our school system, when they're in high school, they have to take English and math and science and history and all the different subjects. And so for a child who's obsessed with history but doesn't like math, he might be able to do math perfectly, but he just he's not interested in it. So it takes an extra effort for them to work on something that is not their special interest. So again, it can be a challenge, but in most cases, you can use it as a strength, as a possible way of being independent adult and making a living. Another topic is the sensory sensitivities. With kids in the spectrum, we know about kids being too sensitive or no sensitive at all to light and touch and clothes, and some kids like their clothes really tight, some kids like just baggy clothing, but it's also the fact of movement around them. Being a big crowd, just because people are moving around them, that can be extremely overwhelming. And that's one thing that many parents come to us and say, no, he doesn't have any sensory issues because she's fine with light and she's fine with, but maybe just being in a classroom with 20 other kids around her, where people are chatting or moving, or all that movement around them can be overwhelming and make the day very anxiety-provoking for them. In the day-to-day, what happens then if they are, if they spend the day in a place that is overwhelming for them, then they get tired, they are exhausted by the time they get home, they can't concentrate. If I'm in a classroom and then I have these sensory issues, I can't really focus on what the teacher is saying. I can't take notes because this person next to me is talking, or the light from the window is hitting me right here, or the teacher is speaking too loud or too soft. So something that we need to consider. And then motor differences, for many of our kids, they have difficulty with fine motor skills. They're not particularly coordinated, although many kids are, and they play sports and everything. Motor planning, the gross motor activities, and then comes again the part of navigating halls, the aisles, the classrooms. Just being in a high school with 1,200 students and just navigating that hallway with all those people and knowing where to go and all those things can be an overwhelming experience for them. And then the cognitive differences. We have in the spectrum, like Cornelia was saying, it's a big spectrum, and we have kids who are extremely smart, but then they lack executive functioning, or they have issues with processing speed. And then you have a child who is in class, and he can recite the whole, Constitution, but then the teacher cannot understand why this child who's giving me a lecture on the Civil War cannot write a paper. Well, because it has nothing with, having the capacity of doing it or not. It has to do with executive functioning, it has to do with processing speed, it has to do with many other things. But as we said before, they have usually strong memorization skills. The other thing is they prefer, most of them, literal reasoning over abstract thinking. And for many of our kids, when they're in English class and they have to read a book that is not factual, it's really hard for them to understand, not the book, they will understand the book and what it says, but to take the perspective of the main character, or understand why a character would do some A, B, or C things, and to take that different perspective, because again, it's not literal. Again, the slow processing speed, that can also be a challenge. And one thing that is very high in our the population of kids in the spectrum is the anxiety and the emotional vulnerability. As we've been talking, we now know how stressing their life is, how confusing the world is. You just experience that yourself in 30 seconds of a conversation. So imagine having to spend the whole day like that. It's exhausting, and we're anxious. And me, for example, when I'm exhausted, I can't think clearly. I can overreact. I might say something that I didn't mean to say, just because I'm overwhelmed, just because I'm exhausted. So it's the same for our kids. We really need to understand how the world works, how they think, how they react to the environment, and build a world around them so it can be less exhausting, it can be more manageable, so they are able and they have the capacity to learn skills like emotional regulation, how to talk to other people, how to interact, how to have a conversation. When we have a child who's completely overwhelmed, you yourselves, I'm sure like it happens to me, like when I'm overwhelmed, I can't think. Don't ask me like if I'm having a bad day, I get home and one of my daughters said, I forgot the backpack in school. It's like, it's the end of the world, you forgot the backpack. Why? Because I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired. In a different situation, if I'm having a great day and something happens, I'm able to manage it. So that's okay, sweetie, okay, we'll drive by, so just 5 minutes, it's fine. But I'm able to do that because I'm in a good state emotionally. When you spend the day with all that stimuli around you, when you spend the day feeling overwhelmed and feeling confused, then it's harder to put in practice those self-regulation skills. And so that's something that we need to teach our kids from very early on. Even our kids, there are many kids in the spectrum who they just are smart enough that they can go through elementary school and they can manage themselves, but then when expectations change in middle school or high school, and when the social dynamics becomes more and more complicated, then it can start getting more and more overwhelming. So it's important that then, by that time, they already have those skills of self-regulation and managing anxiety. Okay, and this is going back to what I said before. When you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. So in terms of advocacy, again, it's key to understand your own child's profile. And based on that profile, then you build the services and the team and the IEP that he or she needs, but it's according to him or her. And do you want to finish up? Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so we will talk about practical strategies. I think we have, how much time do we have?
You have 10 minutes.
We have 10 minutes left, okay. social communication strategies. These are things, so what we're gonna talk about now is like things that you can implement right now that are helpful, that you can know about your child. We'll talk about that and then we'll wrap up with things that we can do to help you. So, social communication. It's really helpful to be really direct and concrete with the children, or students. Explain unwritten rules. You know, in every environment, things are different. And like, you go into the library, it's different than going into the gym. We, a lot of times, get these nuances, these differences, but our kids don't necessarily get that. So spelling it out, being really clear. I'm not going to go, for the sake of time, over every point because you all have it in there. If you have any questions, please ask. But the other thing is really build self-awareness and self-advocacy, and that's by sort of talking things through. Really explain, you know, step by step. The reason that you're frustrated today is because, you know, first it started off with an itch of the tag, and then it was really, you were confused as to, you know, just explaining. It's almost like you're the interpreter. Perspective taking. So this is the live out loud. This is what I'm talking about. And, you know, we're talking about your green shoes. And, you know, I sat with my son one time on a bus, and he looked at someone and said, "Why are you so fat?" And I went, "Oh my God." And so I had to to figure out how to explain it. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You just say, the reason that might not be a great thing to say is this, and this is how they may feel.
And it's also, I'm sorry.
Please, jump right in.
That in that example you were given, we are with our kids out there, and we see things happening all the time. Grocery store, everywhere. Every time that you see something that you can use as an example, use it. Oh, did you see that kid saying that? What do you think of that? And then use it as a teaching moment. When you're watching a movie, when you are out with the family, use every single thing that you see out there to teach them that.
Yes. Executive functioning support. So this is like, break it down, step by step. Like in our, with any activity, it's so hard to break it down. Like first you, even taking a shower. I realized at one point that my son, you know, you go through the normal thing, you shower them, and then you sort of time, and he was taking the shower, but I noticed after a few days, like his hair wasn't really clean. And so it's like literally even things like that, break it down. First you put the water on, then you put the soap on, then you lather it, or whatever the steps are. But like breaking it down like that, it's helpful. Special talents and interests. Okay, so the great thing about this is you can use the special interests to connect, right? So one time my son didn't like meeting new people, and someone came in and he had a whale. Whales were his favorite thing. He had a whale, and the woman couldn't stand meeting people, but this woman came up and she said, "That whale is so cool." And she's like, "Tell me about it." And he like literally started talking. And I am like, what's going on here? This has never happened before, and it taught me such a lesson of using that. Peers can connect through that. Curriculum can connect through that. You can really use that. It can be for employment down the line. You know, you can really use that. It's a very useful thing. As much as it's hard to transition from, you can look at the positive and really help with that. Sensory support. So sensory can be so hard for the kids. So being aware of if light's overwhelming, if it's like a lot of times fluorescent light is really hard, think about the lighting. If the tags are itchy, cut them out. Think about the material, noise, you know, find ways to support that because it is so exhausting through the day to deal with that.
Yes, it's also, there's something we always talk about at A&E is about the sensory bank. Think about that you have your bank account, and well, I get paid, and then I deposit in my bank account, and then I go shopping, and I spend money. So next time I get paid, then that's my savings account, right? So it's the same thing with the sensory input and output. If my kid, I know that being in an environment with a lot of people is going to take, let's say, 2 points out of that savings account of sensory overload. And then having to do math homework is taking 2 more points, that's 4 points. So if by the end of the day we think, oh, he's lost at least 10 points in sensory overload, what can he do to put money back into that account? What activities can recharge him so he's not in the negative when it comes to sensory overload? And so is it reading a book? Is it watching a video? Is it playing a video game? Is it going for a walk? For different kids and different things. So whatever it is that works for him or her to put money back in the account so they're ready for the next day. They need to find that time and that activity that re-energize them and recharge them.
Perfect. No, that's exactly right. Emotional support. One of the things that I really realized is that when I can remain calm, it makes the biggest difference in my household. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot, but when I can, it's like really, really helpful. Also teaching them techniques, or our children techniques, of how to relax. You know, is it breathing exercise? Is it reading a book in the corner? Whatever it is. Previewing transitions like the hallmark, like yikes, really difficult thing. So you can transition from leaving your house and being a kid at home to being a student in school. That's a major transition. You can transition from going from one classroom to the next. That is it's amazing how many transitions there are throughout the day that we don't even realize that they're coping with and having a hard time with. And so when you can literally preview it, that helps so much.
I wanted to reinforce what you were saying about keeping calm. I always tell parents, we need to talk like a navigation system. So you are in the car and you're driving and it says, please turn right, and you don't. So the navigation system doesn't say, I told you to turn right. No, it says rerouting. Please turn right. The navigation is saying exactly the same thing until you get to your destination. But what happens if the navigation starts yelling at me? I'm like, what? I mean, I get all confused, overwhelmed, I never get to where I need to get. So it's exactly the same thing with our kids. When you use a calm voice, the moment we raise our voice or start using our hands, they immediately lose focus on the message. They start trying to read our body language. Why is she yelling? Is she raising the voice? Is it too much? And the message is lost. So if we can use that navigation voice, that Siri voice, always turn right, recalculate, and eventually they get to where they need to get.
That is a perfect example, and it really sort of ties into the educate rather than punish.
Yeah.
They're doing the best they can, and have so much complexity to deal with. You talk about this one.
This is about the IP referrals for evaluation. We can do 3 presentations on this, so I'm gonna go really fast. The first thing you have is the referral. I'm assuming many of you already went through that process, but it's important that you always remember that our kids are never the same. Everything changes, they change. So if at any point you feel like they're facing new challenges, or they're improving or something, or something else is coming up, remember you can always do another referral. You can start in step 1 again. It doesn't have to be just to get a diagnosis, okay? And then after you take the referral to school, the school has 5 business days to send you the authorization that you have to sign so the school can do the evaluation. After after that, the school has 30 business days to conduct the evaluations, and then when the evaluations, after those 30 days, we need to convene to a team meeting where you'll get the results for the evaluation. And again, let's say that your kid has an IP already and is receiving all these services, but then he gets to middle school and he's all of a sudden struggling again. So something's going on. So we start again with a referral, and the school is going to do another evaluation, and then it's the same thing. They have 30 business days to perform the evaluation and call a team meeting. And then after that, it's 45 business days until the parents receive the IEP. So keep those numbers in mind from when you have to go through the process again, if you have to go through the process again. So, and then after you receive the IEP, parents have 30 days to respond to the IEP. And always remember that you have 3 choices for how to respond to the IEP. You can agree with the whole IEP, you can reject the whole IEP, or you can just reject part of the IEP. Let's say that I'm okay with the OT services and the counseling services, but I think that he needs more ABA or more speech and language services. So I can say I reject the speech and language services, or I reject the omission, or let's say that he's not receiving speech and language and we think that he needs it. So you can say I reject the omission of speech and language services. And if that happens, if you reject part of the IEP, he's still going to receive the services that were in his last IEP. So it's not like, oh, if I reject this, then he's not getting more services. It's not like that. The prior IEP, he's still going to get those services until we negotiate with the school and get the services in place. In a nutshell.
They can help you. Who are we? We're an advocacy agency. We help individuals, we help families, and we help professionals. We build community, we provide information, we educate, we provide support. We're basically here for people like us, like for parents and families. We have free phone consultations. So what that is that you can call for instance, if you need a list of psychologists in your area. That's like a 2 to 5 minute call. You could call and say, I need psychologists in this area. Do you have anyone you can recommend? We have an entire database. Psychologists, neuropsychologists, occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, everything that we need to deal with sometimes or might deal with, we have that in our database. Or even if you just need an advice question that could take up to 30 minutes, it's a free call. Yes.
Do you know where, like I live in West Orange, do you know where, like my daughter's 14, do you know any place, like I want her to hang, like a lot of her friends, she goes to college, so none of her friends live around. So it's hard for her to go out, like with the like other 14-year-olds go out, they do this. So it's hard for her. That's my big thing. We want to get her into stuff, but
yeah, I see where you're going. Like
even if it's dances or just
you're making the perfect point. I'm so glad
like
you asked
that's
that
my
question.
big thing. Like we want her to get her out of the house to.
That's why you call.
Okay.
That's why you call.
Okay.
So we've got calls, but we also have, which is sort of a longer version of this, coaching. So this is like 1 hour coaching sessions with people that all, we all understand it on a cellular level. The thing I'm really excited about is that your district has a grant. And the grant allows us to offer it to you for free until next June. So this is a service I really want to share with you. And we have a sign-up sheet here today if you want to take advantage of it today, and we will pass that around. We have a Spanish speaker who can do, we also, and all different tons of information. We can help you with any type of parenting thing that comes up, that shows up.
And let me just pause for a second. We have 2 other speakers, so Cornelia is just going to be wrapping up her handout, and they have their contact information, plus they will be here in the back to sign you up for parent coaching, to answer additional questions, so they will be here, and all the slides are also available and will be on our SpedPAC website, just as an FYI.
Perfect.
And I just wanted to let you guys know too, I forgot to mention that we have 2 assistant directors from special education here, Deborah Gately and Zachary Houston. Zach will be doing the presentation. So they'll be here for a little bit. If you guys have questions, they're here to answer questions as well.
That's excellent. Should I just wrap it up? Okay, I'm going to just tell you the quickest thing. We got school and college support. We've got support groups of all varieties.
In person and via Zoom. If it's it's hard for you to get out of the house to go to a support group, you can do it online.
We've got social events, Mom's Night Out, fathers groups, couples, families. We've got training and education. We have an intimacy, dating, and sexuality coming up this weekend. We have housing consultations, family grants, forums, clinics. You can connect with us. And I've told you, we've got a website, please connect to that. And, you know, you've got the parent coaching. I'm gonna pass this around, and you can, okay, and I'm gonna pass this around, and you can, feel free to sign up, just provide your information.
Thank
you so much.
much.
Get their presentation, you have no presentation.
Thank you, you guys are awesome. So our next speaker is Zachary Houston, the Assistant Director of Applied Behavioral Analysis Services for the Special Education Department. Zach was here last month with us, and he also talked about assessing ABA services without an autism diagnosis. So sometimes children have different challenges that they can also still access ABA services without the autism diagnosis. Today he's focusing on receiving those services with the autism diagnosis. But if you have questions related to my other child doesn't have it and he's here, ask the question.
She just has to get in the ring now. You know that I had to be quick last time. I'm going to be quick again this time. So if you need additional support, you can always call me at the special ed office, and I'll help for additional conversation. You guys can pass this around, please. This is the handouts. All right. So we're going to very quickly talk about Autism Applied Behavior Analysis FBAs in settings in 20 minutes or less. Here it goes. So as you guys know, the prevalence of autism is going up, right? So CDC just came out with new numbers. It's 1 in 59 children now that have autism, 1 in 38 boys, and 1 in 37 boys and 1 in 151 girls. Here in Boston, though, in terms of students with the primary disability of autism on their IEPs, we have 1 in 37.5 of our students. So we actually have a much higher rate of autism, and a lot of that has to do with the hospitals in the area and a lot of other factors. But we have a much higher rate of autism than what the CDC reports is the national rates or international rates. Yeah, awareness is a huge factor, right? And so what you'll see, though, is that it's not all that alarming when you look at us compared to other Massachusetts districts. It's not that much out of character. So the rates of autism from 2007-8 in terms of IEP statistics, not medical statistics, have gone from about 1% of students to about 2 to 2.5% of students being on IEPs with a primary disability of autism. So you're not alone. I want to go through this. I'm sure that you're going to hear, you've already heard a lot about this, but I just want to make sure. In every IEP meeting for a student with autism, there are 7 things that must be discussed as part of the IEP process. And those are verbal and nonverbal communication needs of the student, the need to develop social interaction skills and proficiencies, the needs resulting from unusual responses to sensory experiences, needs resulting from resistance to change and transitions, needs resulting from engagement in repetitive activities or stereotype movements, need for positive behavioral intervention, or the need for assistive technology, and of course, whatever else your child needs in terms of discussion should be discussed in the meeting, but these 7 areas, by law, must be a part of the discussion for your student. Now, depending on the IEP meeting and who's in it, that may be naturally embedded into the conversation, it may not stand out as much. Generally, there's someone like me sitting at the table who's checking off a list to make sure that all the things get covered. If there's not, though, and you're not sure all those things came up, you can ask the coordinator, did we hit all of the 7 areas? And they have it in the IEP system. It specifically asks them, did you cover these things, and what was the discussion about them? So they should be able to clarify for you if anything was missed or what additional conversation needs to be had. So let's talk about ABA just for a quick second, because that's my thing. It's my favorite thing in the world. The basics, 95 to 98% of everything we do is learned, and applied behavior analysis is all about learning, right? So nothing happens for no reason, everything happens for a reason, and the job of applied behavior analysis is to find out what those reasons are and to support your student in learning new ways to do things if the ways that they're doing things are challenging or not quite working for them. Okay? So, really quickly, this is one of the questions I get most often. So I've tried to run through this in a Venn diagram that hopefully you'll find helpful. ABA services versus ABA strength. So we provide applied behavior analysis in every school in the district if a child needs it, right? We've done our evaluation, the evaluation says the student needs it, we provide it in every single school in the district. So you do not have to be in a specific type of classroom, you do not have to have a specific disability or specific type of support in order to have the applied behavior analysis support. Some of our students, however, are in what we call ABA strands. They used to be called autism strands, for those of you who have been with the district for a longer period of time. We changed the name to applied behavior analysis strands to more accurately reflect the type of teaching that happens in that setting, and also to open up the awareness that applied behavior analysis is for more than just students with autism, right? So in both settings, teaching is based upon the principles of applied behavior analysis, obviously. The major focus is on the development of critical skills, or cusps as sometimes we call them, and functional language that the student might need. Our goal is to develop group instruction skills because life occurs in groups. And so teaching our students to be able to learn in that context broadens the amount of things they can learn, the way they can learn them, and the context in which they can learn them. And typically, with the ABA strand and ABA services, it does typically occur either one-on-one or in a very small group because we're working on those skills. So you don't typically see an ABA group of 15, for example. Yeah.
Did they make it easier to get ABA?
What do you mean?
Because years ago, when my daughter was little, we thought it took 4.5 years and then we had to get a lawyer involved to get an ABA. And that's with the doctors, the teachers, everyone.
So in the Boston Public Schools, we provide 4,000 hours a week of applied behavior analysis services to about 1,500 students.
We finally got it, but by that time, she really needed it.
So we have a very large workforce, multiple contracts supporting that, so it should not be hard to get ABA services if that's what your child needs.
Well, maybe it's changed since then.
Sure. In the ABA services, as I said, so the big difference here, ABA services and strands, I'm trying to be quick, is the services are typically provided in an isolated setting to really drill in on specific skills that are necessary for the setting that your child is in. So let's say your child is in an inclusion classroom, but there are some just little pieces that are missing for the student to be able to access the instruction in that environment. The ABA specialist's job is to, with a laser focus, go in and say, okay, these are the 3 things I'm teaching. I'm going to pull you aside, I'm going to work on teaching those things, then I'm going to put you back with the group, and we're going to work on generalizing those to the group, okay? It occurs in all settings across the district. I really want to drive that point home. You do not have to move your child into an ABA strand to receive ABA support.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
You know, so you have to have that on your IEP as a direct service pullout as opposed to
Yes,
general
absolutely.
education. So just so families know, when you look at your grade for services, that you want to make sure it says pullout if that's what you're looking for.
All right, if you want the student pulled to the side, it's got to be in that C grid, that bottom grid, okay? In the ABA strand, ABA-based teaching is the way we teach. It's the way our teachers have been taught to teach. It's what the paraprofessionals have been taught to do. Everybody is using applied behavior analysis all day long in the way we teach. And even in that setting, some students also receive ABA services on top of that. And those are the students who require really individualized pieces of teaching in addition to what the whole environment provides. Not everybody in that setting needs both, but sometimes they do. Okay? This instructional model exists only in the ABA strand classrooms. So if you have a student who requires that sort of teaching all day long, and that's the way they learn, and that's where we are in life, then this is the only place where the all-day teachers teach using ABA, Perez teach using ABA, and then for every 4 classrooms there's a BCBA on staff, and then someone from my staff is overseeing all of that. So there's quite a bit of applied behavior analysis support that goes into these settings. Again, it's available everywhere, but there's a difference in the type of teaching that happens in the environments. Okay. Working with ABA staff and board-certified behavior analysts. So, ABA trained staff exist in many places across the district, and your child may just need someone who knows stuff about ABA, but is not necessarily a BCBA, who's supporting the team and guiding the goal development and what we're doing. Or your team may need a board-certified behavior analyst like myself on the team who's really helping with choosing those next targets and identifying when the student's not learning quite like we'd expect them to, what we need to change to help make that happen. ABAs are an important part of your team. Don't neglect the importance of that. Oh, hold on, I'm not yet ready up.
Sorry, I'll go back, sorry.
They have advanced training and skills that can help many challenges, from teaching learners with unique learning styles to responding to challenging behaviors appropriately. And good teaching incorporates many of the principles of applied behavior analysis. So remember, just because there's not necessarily a BCBA sitting at the table, a board-certified behavior analyst sitting at the table, does not mean that you don't have someone with these skills and strategies that's supporting the teaching for your student. But that's a just right fit depending on the child. Okay? So many of you have heard the ACE, especially if you have a student who's in one of our ABA settings. It's called the Autism Curriculum Encyclopedia. It's a resource that comes to us from the New England Center for Children. The New England Center for Children is like one of the big schools. I'm sure you guys have, those of you who maybe shopped around at some of the out-of-district options, for applied behavior analysis-based teaching specifically for children with autism. This is the primary teaching tool support that we use in our ABA strands. It's also what our ABA specialists use when they're working directly with students. It has behaviorally based teaching support and procedures that we can modify and adjust to your child so that they get sort of the best teaching that we're able to provide. You guys will all have access to this presentation, and this is a link to next sort of, here's how great we are, this is the ACE. So if you want to learn more, there it is. Okay. Now I'm going to jump over to FBAs, Functional Behavior Assessments. So functional behavior assessments are an assessment tool that can be done by anybody who's trained. Many times if you've had a referral for an FBA by a medical doctor, they'll say it has to be done by a board-certified behavior analyst. Sometimes that can be helpful, sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not necessary. Generally, with the more complicated FBAs, they cross my desk at some point anyway. Either I read it quickly and ask questions of things that they should maybe look at or consider, or I send one of my team members out and say, you might want to help them with this, right? But it doesn't always have to be a board-certified behavior analyst. The goal of a functional behavior assessment is it may result in more powerful behavioral intervention. It provides an active involvement in the process of all parties that are involved, which is critical. And FBA is much more than filling out a form. So if someone hands you a questionnaire that's been filled out and says this is your FBA, they have not completed the FBA. That's one of the things they might do while doing an FBA, but it is not a whole FBA. Functional assessment involves three main parts. Direct observation of the student, which is critical. Whoever does the FBA needs to have seen the child. If someone hands you an FBA and has never seen your child, there's a problem. Informant methods, so we have interviews and questionnaires, which some people sometimes consider an FBA. So there's a tool called the FACTS, the Functional Assessment Clinical Questionnaire Teacher for Teachers. I don't remember what the rest of the letters are. Sometimes people think that's the whole FBA and they hand it to you and it's just got a list of questions. And it has some really great information, but it's not a complete functional behavior assessment by itself. And then the last part, which is the most important part, is the functional analysis. So taking the direct observation, the questionnaires and interviews you've done, and then looking at the antecedents and consequences and finding out why the student is doing what they're doing and why it's a problem. And sometimes we find it's not a problem. Okay.
Why would someone request an FBA?
So typically it's because of challenging behavior. So physical aggression, self-injurious behavior, property destruction. Not always. Sometimes it can be because there's something that's just... Transitions seem to upset my child. I want to know more about that or something like that. That's a less common reason for an FBA, but usually it's because of extreme challenging behaviors. Okay?
So it's not just a behavioral problem with the child. Is it pretty much for a behavioral?
Not always, but usually, yes.
But a child can do FBA without having a behavioral problem.
So there's always, so when you do a functional behavior assessment, there's always some sort of a behavior question. So there's a behavior that we are seeking to change, and that's why we're doing the assessment, because what we've tried to do to change it isn't working. So it could be something not necessarily physical aggression. It could be there's a social challenge and we're not sure why it's still happening because we've taught the student about social skills, we've supported those things, and we're still running into this thing, and that might be okay, but always there's a behavior you want to change, and that's why you do a functional behavior assessment, yes. Okay?
But Zach, it can include like readiness skills and sustained attention and other things too that they're working to get the child to be able to
I think
fully
so
in
we
the
might
class.
be blending two different things. There's an applied behavior analysis evaluation and a functional behavior assessment. So the ABA evaluation looks at the student's skills and behaviors, and that's what we use to decide services, whether or not services are needed. A functional behavior assessment will never recommend services, it'll recommend a behavior support plan. So that's the difference between the two.
Thank you.
The process, so interviews of staff, identify the challenges, write definitions, do the tools, review the data, write the report. Pretty simple and straightforward. It's not a hugely involved process, but it does involve time and spending time with your child. So who does it? The law tells us that it has to be any trained person. Under IDEA, they say functional assessments have to be done by any trained person. So my department does a 5-part, 10-hour, or up to 15 if they do all their homework, series on how to do an FBA, right? Sometimes people say, well, I read a thing about how to do an FBA, so now I know how to do an FBA. I would just make sure you read it carefully and make sure that that person really knew what they were doing. And if you ever have any questions, you can always send it back to us and say, this is what I received as the FBA. I'm not sure that this is enough, or maybe it's your first time seeing one, and you just want to know whether or not it's complete and accurate. We'll happily take a look at it. We tell the schools the same thing. We'll happily take a look at it and support it. But we do lots and lots of training for teachers, school psychologists, social workers on how to do these, so that there are lots of people in lots of the schools who can do this type of support, so that you're not waiting for one of the 11 people on my team to be the person who comes out and does it. Okay? Last slide, my favorite slide. School settings for students with autism. So the reason we changed, one of the main reasons we changed the name of the autism strand from autism strand was because people said, oh, autism's a primary disability. This is where you go. Either inclusion or autism strand. Those are your choices. And the reality is that because autism is such a diverse disability and has so many different representations, autism strand is not always the right place for every single student who has autism, and inclusion is not always the right place for every single student who has autism. So settings are not dictated by a student's primary disability. They're dictated by how your child learns and the type of learning supports we provide in those settings, okay? So if anyone tells you, oh, autism, you go to the autism strand, because sometimes people still call it that. That's not necessarily the case. So just for context purposes, right now, 584 of our students in Boston Public Schools are in the ABA strands. There are 371 that are sitting in what we call inclusion classrooms, so they're students who are on IEPs and special education seats, but they are in an inclusion general education classroom. Then we have 93 that are in resource. That means that they are in general education seats receiving supports and receiving the general education curriculum. Then we have about 84 others that don't fit in any of those boxes and are in different types of programs throughout the district. So be mindful that just because a student has autism does not mean that they have to go to either the ABA strand or the inclusion program. There are many different types of teaching that are appropriate for many different types of kids. That's where folks from my team can be very, very helpful in figuring that out. So if there's some question, if your kid's maybe not doing so great where they are, that's when you can say, you know, I really think we might need to do an ABA evaluation if one hasn't already been done. Someone from my team can come out, take a look, and then we can provide our behavior analytic lens of support. Yeah.
On my last son's IEP meeting, I requested an ABA evaluation, but they said what they did in school is teach the kids like how to hold a pen, or if they don't know how to drink, how to hold a glass, so he wouldn't qualify for that. I don't think that's true. I mean, at the moment I didn't say much, and I don't feel like that's the case. Because then, I mean, if a kid doesn't know how to get dressed, you're gonna undress the kid and teach him how to get dressed. So, I think I was lied to.
I don't know that you were lied to. I think that there's, applied behavior analysis is a very complex discipline. I'm very proud to be a part of it, but not everyone fully understands all of the things that applied behavior analysis does. And if you go far back in time, there were not a lot of people who did applied behavior analysis. It's a relatively young field. For example, when I first got certified, there were only 6,000 certified behavior analysts in the world, right? So it's a relatively young field, and sometimes people misunderstand. I would say if ever you ask for an ABA evaluation, and this is to all of you, and someone just flat out tells you, nah, no, your kid doesn't need it, and you really feel that maybe a behavior analyst lens...
medical plan that his doctor, said he needs it.
So I receive lots and lots and lots of letters from doctors that say, oh, autism? Great! This child needs 30 hours a week of applied behavior analysis. That's not always the case, and it's a major, major overstatement. It's based on the early intervention model for autism. So in early intervention, most children receive 20 to 30 hours a week of intensive teaching, and because we're Massachusetts, there's funding and supports for that. Once they transition into school, depending on how they're being taught, if they're learning, right, a certain portion of what they're getting is already applied behavior in nature, and that's where it gets really tricky, right? So once we're in school, if your student is learning and making progress relative to the curriculum, that means that there's already some of the needed pieces of ABA for your child that are already working, right? So, like I said, it gets very, very complicated. I would say if someone tells you no ABA for your child flat out and you feel really passionately about it, just call the special ed office, tell them you want to talk to the guy who does ABA, and they'll put you on the phone with me. We can have specific conversations about you and your child, and then that way I can help to understand whether or not the right thing was told to you, or maybe we do need to look at an evaluation.
And you should also always request an evaluation in writing, so
Yes.
you have a record of that you requested it and it's in writing.
Yes,
So
of
that's
course.
really important as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Hi, our ABA instructor at our school has left, but my son hasn't been receiving ABA. So will BPS school reach out to get to hire one, or do you guys say yes?
So
I emailed the principal and I'm on top of it.
So as I mentioned, we provide 4,000 hours a week of services, but sometimes people quit and change jobs, and it creates disruption in our universe. It's a really awesome time to be an ABA because everybody wants it. It's also a really challenging time to be an ABA because there aren't enough people who do it. So we can't just put a warm body with your child because applied behavior analysis is a very complex topic, as I mentioned. It's about finding a trained person who knows how to do it correctly. So the contractors that I use in some of our schools and our internal staff come from a set workforce of people who are trained, and we're all fighting over the same people. So generally when someone loses someone, it can be very challenging to replace them. So if your services are interrupted, that's another situation where you can call me and let me know. I probably already know and am working on it, but there is a statewide shortage in people who do what we do, applied behavior analysis. I'm on a subcommittee for autism with folks from around the state, and the conversation we have every single month is how do we train more people to do this and get them to come and work in our schools and other settings so that we don't have this shortage. But I keep a compensatory hours document of every single student in the district who has ABA, and when their services are...
It's going to be, are they going to be made up? Or
Yes,
is it just
yep.
this month?
So legally, we don't have to make up minute for minute, but Boston Public Schools does. So every minute your child misses goes into a log that I keep, and it gets made up. Because we think your child should receive their services. It's terrible, and I'm very sorry, and there's probably true of a few of you out here in the audience. But when someone leaves, we have to work very, very hard to replace them with somebody who's quality and not just a warm body, and sometimes that takes a bit of time. Okay. Other questions?
How did you know the person left? Because my son received ABA, but it's not that many hours per week, and I don't keep up to date with it. I mean, this is all new for me. So how do you know
the lady sent
a letter? Okay.
You should be notified
Okay.
anytime the services
I
are
just wanted
interrupted.
to know.
Yeah, it should. We're a large district, but you should be notified anytime services are. Yep.
I was wondering if my son is finished, he's in an ABA strand classroom and he's sort of finished most of his goals. Is there something that I need to do or to make sure that he keeps on moving? Because I feel like he's kind of stuck and I'm not sure if it should come to his teacher or is he CBA or what should I...
You always have the ability to reconvene the team if you feel like the IEP supports are stagnating and maybe they're not moving forward quickly enough. Generally, the first step I would say is to reach out to the teacher and ask the teacher, what are the next steps? What are we doing now?
Can the teacher just move him along or do I need to
You mean to another
ask
setting?
do I need to, not another, he needs to stay in that classroom, but I'm like, do I need to ask this teacher to reconvene a meeting, or can she just like?
So the teachers should be continuing to target what's next and what's next and what's next.
Okay,
The only time where that maybe won't be the case is if maybe the IEP is partially rejected and we're bound to old goals, which is sometimes a challenge, so I won't go into the details of necessarily what's going on, but sometimes if the goals on an IEP get rejected, then the team has to stick with those older goals.
And he finished all of
They
his
should
goals
keep
that
on
in the
moving.
IEP. They can just keep moving without me reconvening.
So they will continue to educate your child. They won't develop new goals without involving you. So if you want new goals, then you need to reconvene the team. If you want them just to continue moving forward as educators doing special education, then just, you see what I'm saying?
But if I want them like as move forward, like in his ABA, like behavioral skills, like that sort of thing.
All of that should continue naturally, but
Okay.
I would say if you're at all concerned, put a call in.
Okay, all right, thank you.
There's been a lot of information given out. My head is going like this.
Yes, I know. It was a very short time, and
So
Diane's
it's
not
being
even gonna get her
recorded,
time.
it's being recorded, and we will have it up on our website so you can review it again.
And you can always call me.
Okay, my question was, because I have so much information now, I don't know where I should go for my granddaughter. I mean, what you're saying is wonderful. What she was saying is wonderful. Those services she needs. But I don't know if I need to go through all these services for her. So where do I start with her?
So
She does have an IEP.
Okay, so I would begin with the coordinator for special ed at your school, right? Have that conversation. I was at SpedPAC and I got all this information, and now I'm wondering whether or not we're doing everything we should be doing for my child. Get their perspective, see how it sits with you. Talk to the folks at AA&E, give them a call. If you're still feeling like you want more information, you can always call me. In the main special ed line, they know how to track me down no matter where I am in the district.
A lot of times I don't know the right questions to ask for one.
You know what, Michelle from Bryce's Journey, she could also
I
talk to you
do.
as well. Michelle.
Bryce, right here, Michelle, raise your hand. And just so you know, it's 8:30 now, and Diane is more than willing to still, anyone that's gonna stay, she's still gonna do her presentation. But Zach is also gonna be in the back to get specific questions, or Michelle to just touch base, make sure you have the contact information for next steps for the specific cases. And AA&E is still there for, remember, the coaching and the other skill sets they have available that will help you develop your next plan strategies also. So just know that these resources they're not disappearing once the person stops talking. If you need to step in the back and talk to someone, please feel free to. But we do understand with the child care in the back and school tomorrow, that some people may have to leave. But Diane is still available to the presentation, and we'll have her handouts also.
Yeah, and if you do have to leave, you have the presentation, has all the websites and phone numbers and different things on it, so, that's
Seriously, just call. I'll help. God.
You'll call for
What?
and wait for like a quick transition, so.
An FDA?
yeah.
So
services, and now a lot of it is state services. So that's what we want to talk to you about tonight, is state services. So for the next slide, Chapter 71B, Section 3. Zach already touched upon this, but I just want to reiterate the importance of this. So there's 7 areas that need to be addressed within the IEP. They're all listed here, and Zach went over them, and they're on my slide, or on this slide. Really, really important. When he talks about that FBA, that's, the behavior is there. You want to ask for that. You want to ask for the training. You want to address social skills. You want to address social interaction. You want to always continue to talk about those things. And start your IEP meeting, asking those, and you can put it in your parent concerns. You can write down all those 7 things, and that can just be part of your parent concerns. But it's really important for you to address all of those things in your IEP. So special education and state services. So, like I said, in addition to special education, what's available for these students, there are additional services with autism from the ages of 3 to 22. They may be eligible. You're not always going to be eligible for all these state services, but you're not going to know unless you apply for some of these services. So we really encourage you to apply for these services.
Where do you apply?
So I'm going to give you the websites for the different things you'll see on here. So this is the Department of Developmental Services. Okay, so this is a state agency that touches kids and adults' life from the time that they're possibly born all the way until they leave this earth. My daughter is with the Department of Developmental Services right now. So I encourage families who think that they might be eligible for you to go to the website, and you can, I'm not going to go through everything, but you can look at how you can become eligible for autism. In 2014, under the Autism Omnibus Law, there's new eligibility. So typically and historically, for the Department of Developmental Services, you had to have an IQ that was lower than 70. Now you can have an IQ with what we call ASD only, really eligible, of 70 and above. So you really want to look at the Department of Developmental Services. A lot of students, before they leave public school, so if your student has autism and they're graduating with their peers, a lot of times, under what they call the 688, they would think that Department of Developmental Services wouldn't be for the student that I just
Diane, can you just try to speak a little bit louder because it's a little bit hard to hear you?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you so much.
So it's that student who might be graduating along with their peers. They only have autism. They may have some other disabilities, but they do not have an intellectual disability. You can do a direct application to see if you are eligible through the Department of Developmental Services. Sometimes the school may miss this because historically they are thinking that it's autism and ID and that the IQ is 70 below. Part of the newly eligible have been missed because of this. So this is a new law, the Autism Omnibus Law, in 2014. So the governor, Governor Baker, has fully funded what we call the Turning 22 budget. We're now capturing students who are graduating at the age of 17, 18, above with their class under that funding. So it's really, really important to have a discussion at the IEP table on graduation and your student and state services. We don't want you to leave school unless you've actually looked into whether your loved one, your student, could possibly be eligible for services before they leave school. So DDS also has 7 autism support centers. Lisa actually worked for one of them, which was called TIL. TIL is our local Metro Boston support center. So there's a lot of things going on in these support centers. There's different activities that could happen that you could sign your child up for. Going into adults, there's parent resources available. There's parent training available, all kinds of things. And what they're noticing, because these actually came into play after the Omnibus Law, is they're kind of figuring out what activities that these kids and young adults with autism are really interested in. So they're starting to change things up. So originally they might have put in really large group activities, and they're finding nobody was coming to these activities. So they're starting to, DDS is starting to look back and think, okay, we need to kind of change gears here and really figure out what do these kids, what do these young adults really want for different activities. So they are working on that. But I encourage you to visit or call an autism support center. You do not have to be found eligible to access the support centers. You can go in there and you can access the parent training and some of the different activities that they have and the information that they have. So again, you do not have to, your child does not have to be found eligible to access any of these support centers. So in addition to the autism support centers, there's also a total of 44 centers, 10 of which are designated as cultural and linguistic specific family support centers. Same thing, even if your child has autism and one of those 7 are not, geographically located near you, you can access some of the other 44 and do the same thing, and they can help connect you to those autism supports that you might need. The DDS also has 2 waivers. The first waiver is the children's waiver. So you can stay on this waiver for up to 3 years. Also, it's income-based. The applications are in October. There is a wait list for this waiver, but I really encourage you to apply. So even if there is a wait list, a lot of these kids, you age out on your birthday or after the 3 years. So I encourage you to apply. If you don't apply, obviously you're not going to get in. Again, it is income-based, but there are services available, and you can access those through the Autism Children's Waiver. Again, this will come out in October. If you go on the DDS website around that time, we really try to get the word out to Boston Public Schools. We send all the information to Lisa to make sure parents get that information so they're able to apply for this.
For information on the children's waiver, also go to your, the 7 autism support centers would have those specifically. And these services would be in addition to whatever you get, whatever your child gets in school.
Right. Yeah, so all of these services that we're talking about are in addition to what is ours. So this is not to supplant anything, this is in addition. So whatever your children are getting in school, that's totally separate from what we're talking about right now. So the DESE DDS program, so this is funded by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, but DDS runs this program. 87% of the children in this program have autism. It's really put in place to help prevent residential. So this is someone who might be suffering from really severe impacts of their disability. But just recently, the governor has imposed a $4 million increase to this program. So currently this program is serving 570 individuals and it is full. And again, so there's a wait list and we would want to be on this wait list. But if the governor's budget passes, the extra $4 million will provide 250 more slots. So again, I encourage you to name in for this, it covers some medical expenses.
So what can they do for us?
What?
Besides in-home.
In-home services, so DDS would fund it, and you would get a DDS coordinator that would help you work on what services your individual child may benefit after school. So community experiences, ABA, maybe some medical expenses, maybe social skill groups. So there's money that would be allocated to your child. And then you would work with the DDS coordinator to figure out what additional types of services would benefit your child. And so again, so the $4 million that has been allocated, we've 250 more slots. That's really huge because the 570 slots hasn't moved in years, and so this is the first time a governor has requested additional funding for this program. So Mass Health, I know a lot of you know a lot about Mass Health, but Mass Common Health for individuals with disabilities who may not be eligible for Mass Health. So I wanted to hand out from the Autism Insurance Resource Center, which is on our website. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. But this is just really about Mass Common Health. What it is, how it can benefit your child with autism, and different things that you may benefit from, which ABA is one of them. So Roxy's going to handle that, but I'm going to do this quickly. I'll go to the next slide. So if your child has been diagnosed with autism, they may be eligible for ABA. AAC devices, which are alternative and augmented communication devices, which is addressed in those 7 areas that we talked about, and PCA services, which is personal care attendant, or CBHI. All of these are through Mass Health. So on the next slide, we have information about each one, with a direct link where you can kind of go on that link and apply and see if you are found eligible. So 1 would be children under the age of 21 who have been diagnosed with autism to be covered. 2, access ABA, which is in-home or in the community. AAC devices, communication is tied to future cognitive ability. So we want, obviously, all of our kids to be able to communicate in whatever way they are able to communicate. Some may be nonverbal, and they may be communicating with an iPad or AAC device. So it's really, really important. Mass Health, who are on the list law, now covers iPads. So that is something also that you can go on their website. You can also work with your school district as a speech therapist to help you apply for that. If it's needed, again, you have to be found eligible for all of these things. Personal care attendant, so that's through Mass Health again. a nurse would come to your home to see if you are eligible for that. But that is someone who needs help with daily living skills, dressing, maybe toileting, getting ready for school in the morning. So you would be, you'd hire a fiscal intermediary, they would pay that person, but you would hire that person. So it could be a neighbor, it could be a friend, and then they would come to your home and they would help your loved one with those daily living skills.
So we can have a personal person?
Yes, if you qualify for it, if it's someone, if your child, your loved one, needs that help in the morning, they would come, Mass Health would send someone to come over and do an assessment to see if you qualify for that service. And then you could hire a neighbor, or you could hire a friend that could come over, and then the fiscal intermediary would pay that person to do that work. So again, these are in addition.
I found out many years later, not that I qualified, but a lot of people didn't realize, and I didn't, that if your child has autism and if you get Mass Health, there's a good chance that you could get SSI to help you financially for your child, and they will pay for Mass Health and all of that, and they will give you a check each month to help with that child. A lot of parents didn't realize
I mean,
that.
SSI, so over the age
I think it's SSI.
Whatever you SSI and SSD, but SSI,
Yes.
over the age of 18.
Yeah.
So for an individual, you may, that your loved one may qualify to get a monthly check.
Yeah.
Because, obviously you have to qualify for it, but for instance, my daughter, she is not able to work more than 20 hours a week, and she's 22 years old, so she needs additional funds to help, even though she lives at home with us, but for all of her expenses, because she can't work more than 20 hours a week, and she has a lot of different expenses.
Yeah, the few friends that get them, they're just like 5, 6, and it helps them just financially get anything out there. But I didn't know that until they had.
Yeah, and that's why we're
trying
trying
to
to
realize.
talk about all the services, because a lot of people don't know, and a lot of times the school system doesn't know about it. We're actually trying to educate the school system to say that these are wraparound services
I just
that you
wanted,
could qualify for.
I just wanted to add, so if you're interested in PCA, I believe that TIL, which is the Metro Boston Autism Support Center, you can go through TIL. There's also a lot of other agencies out there as well. TIL is in Dedham, toward independent living and learning.
TILL.
Yep.
Be able to come and do an assessment.
They might be, you have to, well, TIL has people that do the assessment, but you can contact the PCA program at TIL.
And also back to ABA, because I forgot to give out this one from the Autism Insurance Resource Center. This is finding an ABA provider, which is, like Zach talked about, very difficult. There is a shortage in the state. So everyone is either on a wait list, or they're finding it very, very hard to find an ABA provider. So the Autism Insurance Resource Center, which we have some slides on this, but I wanted to print this specific one out. If you are having trouble, hopefully they can help you. But I would say, a lot of people get on multiple wait lists because it's really difficult to find that provider. Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, so this again is under Mass Health, so someone who might have significant behavioral, emotional, and mental health needs. A lot of times it's co-occurring, so you might have someone with autism that also is having some mental health challenges, and if they're significant and they're challenging, CBHI is something that is paid for through Mass Health, that can be helpful as well outside of the school. I'm not going to go over the law. So the Autism Insurance Resource Center, I just handed out 2 pieces of information. Amy Weinstock and Terry Farrell run that program. It's in Worcester out of UMass Medical. They are a terrific resource. So if you have any insurance questions, if you have any problems with insurance, I really highly encourage you to go to their website or call them. They can be extremely helpful to you. So any kind of insurance issues that you're having, questions that you're having. Also the Autism Support Centers applications, that's one thing I didn't talk about. If you are having trouble filling out a specific application, including Mass Health, they're very hard to fill out. A lot of times parents just give up. call the Autism Insurance Resource Center, call the Autism Insurance or the Autism Support Centers, and they can also be helpful to you. The next one is Massachusetts Rehab Commission. We're going to cover a lot of this in next month when we work on transition services. Mass Rehab, MRC for short, really start working with them at the age of 14. There are a lot of changes that are happening right now with MRC. And they're changing what they call their PREADS, up here as PED, so it's pre-employment transition services for students. They're working directly with school systems, so they hired providers. So BPS is going to have, starting July 1st, 6 providers that they will be working with. If you have any questions about this, you can ask me afterwards, but the Strive team, I don't know if you're familiar with it, we're going to talk about it next month. They are right now getting educated on the new changes in PREADS. So I can give you an example. My daughter last year, she participated in MRC PREADS, so she did some job shadowing. They worked on her resume. They worked on her interviewing skills for her. They helped find her a job. She's still working in that job, so they found her a job at TJ Maxx, and she's still there. So when she had the PREADS program, it looked a little different than it's going to look now, but it's very similar. So you really want to talk to your school about what's going on with MRC, what's going on with PREADS, and of course I have 2 handouts for you on this one. It's very important. Now this should not take place of whatever's happening at school for transition services. This is not in place of that. This is in addition to whatever's going on at school. So you really want to make that clear. You don't want the school to say, oh, MRC is working with you now, so you're all set on transition services. That is not the case. This is in addition to whatever is going on at the school for transition services. Again, I know I'm going through this quickly. We're gonna talk more about this next month when we work on transition. And that's really it. These are just additional resources that I don't want to hold you guys up anymore. But the one thing, there's one on the last slide, there's one resource that I will go over really, really quick because it is an important one. But okay, housing is important, and I know your kids are all young, but at age 18, it's really important that you apply for Section 8 voucher. So Autism Housing Pathways is a really terrific resource. Kathy Boyle's on the Autism Commission with us. She has a ton of information. She does webinars. There's a turning 18 checklist on certain things that you need to do, but it's hard to think about housing when your kids are young, and I get it, but I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit and put it out there that when your child turns 18, your young adult is turning 18, one of the things that you want to check the box is that you apply for this voucher. Section 8 voucher can be with you. For instance, maybe you have like an accessory apartment in your backyard that you want to build with your loved one with autism. That voucher can be used for that, where you will get paid the rent. Yeah, so I mean, or you might have like an aunt who owns a 3-family, right? And said, well, we can, give this to your loved one with autism, where services come to them in that housing situation. That voucher can be used there. So again, we're going to be talking about this next month, more in depth, but really important that I'd like to inform families about this. There's a 10-year waiting list in Boston for a Section 8 voucher. So if you apply at 25, you might not get it until you're 35. So 18 is important. Kelly Boyle is from Autism Housing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so April is Autism Awareness Month, and Boston Public Schools and the Office of Special Education is having an autism luncheon from 10 a.m. to 12 noon at the bowling building. We're going to have all kinds of student artwork. The kids are all working very, very hard. They're doing all kinds of projects, but we're also going to have resource providers, and Kathy Boyle from Autism Housing will be there too. to answer questions. So I hope you can join us April 9th, Tuesday, April 9th from 10 to 12. It's already on the SpedPAC website, www.bostonspedpac.org.
If you guys get the emails already, the email that went out Monday has a link to the autism one.
And if you're not getting it, I have a card here. If you want to email me, I'm happy to send it out. It's just getting out now. The coordinators at the schools have received it. It's going to be disseminated. We're going to have a robocall. And while we're on that subject, I'm just kind of curious. Did people get a call about this meeting tonight?
Yes.
No.